All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Norris. I'm the Executive Director of the California Wildlife Conservation Board. And this is a webinar about the California Climate Bond, Proposition 4, and funding that is available for grants through WCB. As I said, we will be recording this webinar and we'll share it out after we're done. Might take a day or two. We'll post it on our website. There's an opportunity for you to put questions in the Q&A, which we will try to answer as they arise, but there'll also be plenty of opportunity at the end for Q&A, and we'll answer your questions live as much as we can get to. Next slide, please. Who is WCB? We are the California Wildlife Conservation Board. We're a small but mighty team that works on conservation projects statewide, protecting the state's biological diversity and providing present and future generations an opportunity to enjoy what is the amazing state we live in now, California. We do land protection and restoration and wildlife-oriented recreation. Next slide, please. Get a little more specific. We do projects all over the state in every county and every ecosystem. That includes wetland and river restoration, forest and grassland health projects, wildlife crossings and connectivity. We protect land by purchasing it, what we call in fee, as well as conservation easements on private land. We're doing a fair amount of ancestral land return for conservation purposes with tribes, and we fund public access projects. Next slide. Just to give you a taste of what we did last year, in 2024, WCB funded 120 projects, spending about $320 million, 94 million of which were for habitat restoration and enhancement, 163 million for purchase of land or for conservation easement purposes. We protected over 90,000 acres. And we spent 64 million for public access projects, planning, and studies. Next slide, please. If you're following along WCB, you'll know that we have our 2025-2030 draft strategic plan out for public comment right now. And we really hope that you will give us your feedback, but also that you'll take a look at that and understand sort of our main work. Our primary purpose is to protect biological diversity and restore it as much as we can, but also to use conservation to take action on climate change, whether that's sequestering more carbon, reducing carbon pollution, or helping ecosystems and communities be more resilient to the effects of climate change. We also work to provide access to nature for all of Californians. And we have a goal in our strategic plan as well to improve our program delivery, because WCB really prides itself on being really efficient at getting projects done, but we know we can always improve. So please take a look at our draft strategic plan and give us your thoughts by May 16th. Next slide. So the California Climate Bond was passed in November 2024. Thank you, voters of California. It was a $10 billion climate bond. And in that Proposition 4, $1.02 billion was targeted for WCB grant programs. This includes, excuse me, $668 million to protect and enhance fish and wildlife resources and habitats and achieve biodiversity, public access, and conservation goals. That's the biggest bucket and the most flexible. There's also $100 million for habitat connectivity and wildlife crossings and corridors, $100 million for stream flow enhancement, $50 million for fish habitat enhancement and restoration, $80 million for a new San Andreas corridor program, as well as $10 million for the Lower American River Conservancy, which is operated out through WCB, and $22 million for the Southern Ballona Creek watershed. Now, all this money is not available right away. This $1.02 billion will be spread out over 5 to 10 years, and it goes through the normal budget process like any other budget item through the state. So next slide. This is what is proposed through the governor's budget in January for WCB to receive for its 2025-26 fiscal year. This could change, but we expect somewhere in the ballpark of this funding to come through by the end of June, which is why we're beginning our process of asking for applications now. So we'll be ready to spend. So right now there's a request for $176 million in that big category of protecting fish and wildlife and biodiversity, another $21 million for wildlife crossings and corridors, $21 million for stream flow, $11 million for fish habitat enhancement, and $3 million for the Lower American River Conservation Program. Next slide, please. So WCB has worked really hard to create a very simple and easy to access grant program, which my colleagues will talk more about in just a minute. But we have a continuously open rolling application process. That means there's no deadline. You give us your project when it is ready. And we take them at any time. And we kind of take them in any state. We'll give you feedback on your project. There's a simple 2-page pre-application, and then we work with you to determine if that project makes sense for us to bring into our system. And as I said, my colleagues will talk more about this. We are open, all our grants are open to nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and federally recognized tribes. We work with you on your application, and if we think your project is likely to be funded, we take it to our board. We have a 7-member board, and we meet 4 times a year where projects are presented and approved by that board. Now I'm going to turn this over, next slide, to John Walsh, who's Deputy Director over the acquisition program. He's going to walk you through the grant process and how we do land protection. Welcome, John. Thanks.
Thank you, Jen. Again, I'm John Walsh, and I head up our acquisition section, which not only administers grants for fee and conservation easements, but also acts as CDFW's real estate arm in completing acquisitions on their behalf for wildlife areas and ecological reserves, as well as real estate transactional work. This slide will give you a general overview of the WCB grant process for both acquisition and restoration. It all starts with the pre-application. The pre-application is a short concept paper that goes over some high-level details of your project. Typically, it is only 3 to 4 pages long and can be found on our website under the grant tab. Once submitted, WCB staff will review the pre-application, and if it is a strong proposal, we will work with you on a full application. During the full application phase, WCB staff will continue to work with the applicant on all the details of the project and will schedule a site visit if necessary. Once the project is ready, it will be presented at one of our quarterly board meetings. Next slide, please. We want to consult with you during the entire process, both pre-application and full application. WCB will determine the appropriate fund source for your project, so you do not have to worry about which one to apply to. In addition, we work with CDFW to determine regional priorities. Once approved in the full application phase, it will be assigned to a project manager, and the necessary real estate due diligence will begin. It is important to remember that acquisition projects require that all due diligence is completed prior to scheduling a board meeting. Next slide, please. There are some common acquisition issues that we see, and I wanted to share a few with you. The first one is the Public Resources Code 5096.510, which cites that the landowner cannot be a client of the appraisal. They can be an intended user and can contribute to the cost of the appraisal, but the applicant should contract out for the appraisal and be listed as the client. This was put into effect in 2015. We would also like to see the preliminary title reports no less than 6 months old, or if you know of any changes that would also trigger an update. The appraisal should always be done to uniform standards of professional appraisal practices by a licensed appraiser, along with DGS specifications, which can be found on our website. In some cases where federal funding is involved, a yellow book appraisal might be needed. It is best to check with your federal partner. The appraisal should also include the purchase and sale agreement when available, and the date of value needs to be with 1 year of the WCB board meeting. Next slide, please. If your project involves acquisition of a conservation easement, then that needs to be somewhat finalized prior to having the property appraised. This also includes WCB review of that easement. Talk to your project manager early about title issues such as legal description discrepancies, access, encroachments, etc. Another issue that comes up fairly often is that the state can only be part of a transaction that is of fair market value. In other words, the state cannot legally make a payment or be a part of a transaction which exceeds the fair market value. Next slide, please. So Danielle and Joe, both lead an acquisition team here at WCB. Feel free to reach out to us anytime with questions. The best way to get a hold of us is through a shared inbox, landacquisition@wildlife.ca.gov, where one of us will return your email. I'd like to now turn it over to Rebecca Friss, our Deputy Executive Director for Restoration and Administration.
Thanks, John. Next slide, please. So yes, my name is Rebecca Friss, and I oversee the restoration and administration sides of the Wildlife Conservation Board. So I'm going to just give you a little more information about the types of restoration that we've been funding and give you some examples. And then I'll talk a little bit about what makes a good proposal at the end. So we're set up similarly where there's 2 supervisors that are over a group of scientific staff that run programs for WCB. And these are the types of habitats we restore. So in Prop 4, I think you'll seen that there was a stream flow section. And so that's where we're working on streams, lakes, and rivers. And that's all about keeping water in the stream. So we're interested in looking at projects that actually are keeping river in the stream or improving the quality or quantity of water in a stream. So for example, we've done a good number of projects up in the North Coast where there's really salmon streams that are really important for endangered salmonids, and will actually help either put some storage off-site or a small tank off-site so that they can collect water in the winter and then put that water back in the stream in the summer when it's so important for those fish. We also do a lot of projects in wetlands, both inland and coastal, and those projects are often happening with our joint ventures throughout the state. We do projects in the forests, which include forest thinning, road decommissioning, and also some recovery after fires. And we've also been engaged in a lot of restoration up in the North Coast, again, with the Redwoods Rising project. And we do projects in the mountain meadows, where we're doing planning and implementation of meadow restoration. And again, we do that with regional partnerships. In the last couple of years, we got a new program added to our list, and that's a program out in the desert. So in the desert, we have a program manager assigned to that area now. And she's actually helping with acquisition restoration. And we've even helped with developing a seed bank there that will help with restoration in the desert. And we also have been more engaged with monarch and pollinator habitat in particular, trying to help the monarch population by restoring overwintering habitat. And we also have a Lower American River program that's doing a lot of fun stuff right along the American River. Next slide, please. So the other types of restoration we've done throughout the state that we've done quite a bit, there's dune restoration, there's golf course conversions where we're restoring old golf courses. And a big part of what we do is also connectivity. So again, on that Prop 4 list, there was a pot specific to wildlife overcrossings and undercrossings. And here is the Wallace-Annenberg overcrossing down in Los Angeles. It's being touted as the world's largest wildlife overcrossing. This picture is a little outdated because they now have actually put soil on top of that structure. And once they just do another additional overcrossing from an adjacent road, that's going to be open for business. So that's super exciting. WCB was engaged not only in acquisition on both sides of this crossing, but the actual development of the overcrossing itself that's being implemented by Caltrans, National Wildlife Federation, Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, and others. So just to summarize, for restoration, we do fund planning, which could include environmental compliance and permitting. And then we also fund implementation projects. And another part of restoration could also be public access. So we have a standalone public access program where you can help get trails developed, or signage, or ADA compliance, or parking lots, even bathrooms. And you could submit a project just for public access, or you could submit a project for restoration that includes public access. So both of those things are possible. But again, with all the restoration habitats and actions that we do, you don't need to worry about what program to apply to. Again, we'll figure that out on the back end. You just need to go ahead and put in a pre-application. So next slide, please. So same on this side, if you have questions, you can contact me or our two restoration managers, or Scott McFarland and Shannon Lucas. Next slide, please. So just a little bit on what makes a good proposal to WCB. Again, we want to see that you're hitting those major goals in our strategic plan, and that is the biodiversity protection, the climate resilience, the access to all. And it's even better if you have a project that you're funding that provides multiple benefits. So for example, if you're doing a project that benefits an endangered species and provides climate resilience, also provides flood benefits for a local community, and includes public access, that would be potentially a strong project. Two other areas we're also very interested in moving forward, and you'll see in our strategic plan, are benefits for justice communities and working with tribes, which we mentioned before. So we're doing a lot more projects, and we want to work early and often with our tribal partners. We also want to make sure that when you come to us, that you're bringing us a project that has broad community support. For the most part, we're really looking to the regions and the local agencies to tell us what's the highest priority. Since we do work statewide, we want to see how our projects are really connecting with the local regional priorities. So a couple questions that we get a lot about just applying to WCB is if we require a match, and we do not require a match, but we do encourage cost share, whether that be from other entities or just in kind. That will make a stronger proposal. We also don't have a maximum or minimum amount that you can ask for, but we don't, given our limited capacity, we don't want to see really small projects. But we also, with limited funding and the amount of demand that we're going to get, we can't do really, really big projects. So you can always just talk to us, and we will help you kind of right size the ask based on the priorities that you're meeting and how it fits with our priorities. We did get one question that came in ahead of time that I just wanted to address really quickly. And it was just asking whether or not projects can take place in national forests. And the answer is yes. We have worked in the Angeles Forest. We work a lot with U.S. Forest Service across the state. So I think now is the time to pass it back to Jen. Hopefully you've been putting your questions in the Q&A, and she will moderate from here. Back to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. We're going to bring John back to help with Q&A. If we could go to the next slide. I just want to share that we have some pretty fun ways to track what we're doing on social media, but also if you go to our website, wcb.ca.gov, you can get on our listserv. If you didn't get this information through a listserv, but you got it through a friend, make sure you sign up, because then you'll know what's happening with us. Next slide, please. And here are some key resources on our website. We do have a lot of this information that we just shared, which is at our grants page. There's information about our guidelines, what we're looking for in a proposal, our process, and where you can submit pre-applications. So I didn't say this at the beginning, but I wanted to make sure I said it out loud. It was in our notice for this. We are opening our application portal for Proposition 4 projects tomorrow, celebration of Earth Day. Some of you know that we were not accepting applications for acquisition projects. It's been almost a year because our funding was in a tenuous place, but now we feel like we're ready to take those applications. So starting tomorrow, we'll be accepting all of those. Our portal has been open for restoration projects. So if you recently submitted a pre-application for restoration, we already have that. You don't need to resubmit. But if you have an acquisition project, please feel free to send it to us or reach out. I want to make sure folks know, though, that this is not a race. We're not gonna, it's not like first come, first serve, or, you got to be there sleeping out on Black Friday. If your project's not ready tomorrow, that's okay. We're not gonna spend all the money on day one. We really are going to be looking at projects, over the next many years to make sure that we're hitting all those things that Rebecca touched on, really working hard to work in communities that haven't had an opportunity to, get the benefits of our funding in the past. Really looking for those projects that are strategically planned, maybe hit multiple statewide goals. So just know that you don't have to rush. And again, you can always reach out to us, the restoration folks or the acquisition folks, if you need more information. So we're going to get into some questions. So an easy one is funding for wildlife crossings. Are those geared towards crossing improvements, or does that include acquisitions? I'm going to give it to Rebecca.
Yeah, it actually can be both. You know, we did have some Prop 68 money previously that was very specific to overcrossings and undercrossings. So we do want to continue that work where we funded a lot of planning and want to be able to fund some of that implementation. But if there is really a key piece of acquisition that needs to happen, we'd also be considering that.
And I would say that, you know, the best wildlife crossing projects are ones where the land has already been protected on both sides of the crossing. So that strategic planning is part of what we're looking for. It's not as great to try to get a crossing where we don't have control of the land on either side, or it's just a little right away. So that's part of what we are thinking about. But we have lots of funding for acquisition statewide. Rebecca, I'm going to give you another tough one, which is about indirect costs and NCRA.
So for those issues, there is language in Prop 4 that describes a number of options. And I would say that, you know, the Natural Resources Agency is trying to do some cross coordination across all the agencies, and we're in conversations about how we'll address some of those issues. And we would like to continue those conversations, and then when it gets to the point where we really need to decide what's going to happen in a grant, we can talk with folks on a case-by-case basis. So we don't have a real specific answer on that right now, but we are collectively talking about it, and we'll have a plan when the time comes to actually implement those grants.
So to be clear, we're talking about indirect costs associated with restoration grants. There is language in Prop 4 that sets out a bunch of options for how we would come up with the cost. And that is still sort of TBD how we're going to implement that. But I will say we're always excited for cost-effective grant proposals. Lower overhead is always better, but that doesn't mean it's always going to be the case. There'll be cases where we understand that different estimates need to be used. So we'll work on that with you as we look at your proposal. Looking at some other ones. Is previously grazed land eligible for acquisition for potential restoration of habitat and biodiversity? John, jump in.
Yes, it is. We can do an acquisition on that property, and then move right into restoration, which would be a separate application process.
Right. So we often acquire land that needs restoration, although we also acquire land that will be grazed into the future, because a lot of grazing is good for conservation on our grasslands and oak woodlands. But we don't combine restoration projects and acquisition projects into one. So they'll be done in a separate space. So Julia, you're saying follow-up question, you're asking about doing restoration. So we do restoration projects on all habitat types, including grasslands. Rebecca's nodding. That's helpful. All right, I'm gonna look at some more questions, see what else is in here.
There is one which I didn't touch on. Maybe I should have. I have an acquisition project that closes escrow in October. If my project is a good fit with WCB's priorities, would this funding be available by the closing date for my project? So typically an acquisition grant takes 6 to 9 months, possibly longer. We have to go through the appraisal process, and DGS review of the appraisal could sometimes take 6 to 8 weeks. And if there's issues with the appraisals, we'll have to do some back and forth. And so that could eat up a lot of time. And getting a project to a board meeting, we kind of have it all set about 2 months prior to the board meeting.
Yeah, so there's a question about just project timelines in general. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. Yeah, so acquisitions, you should plan on about a year and recognize, yeah, that the funding has to coincide with the board meeting, and then we write the check sort of after the board meeting. Restoration projects, what's the timeline for those, Rebecca, generally speaking?
So I would say once a proposal, a pre-app comes in, you know, and we ask for a full app, it's up to the applicant to get that in and on their time frame. But the whole process could take probably six to 9 months, I would say. But it's all about kind of working with the applicant and making sure a pre-app comes in on their timeline to get it to a certain board meeting.
There's a question here about, is WCB going to continue to fund research projects with Prop 4? Rebecca, can you take that?
Yeah, so with bond funding in general, and I think I mentioned this, like if we're doing some kind of initial assessments or planning, we really want that going toward an actual on the ground project. And research can at times be supportive of, you know, future actual implementation, but pure research isn't something that we technically have funded a lot with proposition money. So those grants are generally just not as competitive, and we're really focusing our bond funding on actually projects that are happening on the ground, dirt moving projects. Same thing with like scientific studies or scientific assessments. Sometimes those can lead to those actual projects. So we do consider those at times, but in general, we're looking for actually planning to implementation type work.
And with bond funding, we're generally, yeah, that's a limitation that we kind of have to abide by. So it's not really even a preference. So it has to be pretty tightly connected to something that we can see in the long term. I'll take this one. It says, are there particular data sets that WCB uses to assess biodiversity benefits when reviewing applications? So we have experts in our office, and we also work very closely with the Department of Fish and Wildlife regional managers and regional teams to better understand sort of what are their priorities on the ground, what are they seeing in real time. So we coordinate a lot with them, and they of course use the CDFW's areas of conservation emphasis. That is an important data set that is worth looking at. So yes. Are grants reimbursable, or is there money up front if awarded? Rebecca, take that one.
Yeah, so all grants are on a reimbursable basis, but we do have some ability to do advances, and again, have a kind of internal policy for that, and we'll work with each applicant on what their needs are for that. But generally, we've done a 25% advance if necessary, and there's some paperwork to fill in to do that, and can talk about other options if needed. But yeah, all grants that we do implement are reimbursable grants.
Here's one. Does WCB support acquisitions of property where built environment exists and will continue to be used to support public access / education? So a lot of the acquisitions do have improvements on them, and they make, if there's like an educational component to that acquisition, yeah, the improvements are allowed to be on the property, but it's kind of a case by case basis. So that's where we would like, you know, early consultation while you're working through the project to see if it would qualify for a grant.
And I see one that's asked what a really small project is, and I know you never want to give a dollar number, right? But in my mind, you know, 30,000 or less becomes, and it could even be 50,000 or less. It kind of depends what the work is, but that's what I would classify as a really small project. So we're not in a position or have the capacity to do grants at that level, given our staffing resources.
I see another one about what types of public land can projects be proposed on? And I think the answer is all public land, but of course you need to be coordinating with the landowner, right? So if you're proposing a restoration project on a national wildlife refuge, you know, the Fish and Wildlife Service should be a key partner in your application, and you should have talked to them. And ultimately, you want to see a letter of support or some other recognition that they want you to do that work. But go ahead, John.
A tribal one, let's see. Federally recognized tribe receives a grant award is a waiver of sovereign immunity required by the WCB for grant funding. And yes, that is correct for federally recognized tribes.
It's a limited waiver though.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Important to know. So yeah, you should know that going in. Our grants, they're public investments, and there needs to be some way for us to monitor that. But we have worked pretty successfully with tribes so far, being able to make sure that's limited to the needs that we have for our grant. There's a question here about, is there a pre-application review, such as a letter of interest or notice of intent to apply, or is it just the application submittal? And it's just the 2-page pre-application. And then we review that. And if we think your project is likely to be successful, we'll reach back out to you and say, we'd like you to submit a full application. You want to add to that, Rebecca? Okay. There's a lot of questions, man. This is hard. We have 69 questions. So this says, what is the status of the Oak Woodland Conservation Program? And I think I'll take this one, actually. So I think my understanding is that historically in other bonds, there were funds assigned to particular programs at WCB, kind of not unlike this San Andreas corridor funding that we just received. And so there were funds that we were spending that were specific to that need. Over time, a lot of those funding sources have been rolled up into this one bigger pot that we can use for any ecosystem. So we can use it for forests, for wetlands, for oak woodlands. We can use it, for redwood forests, deserts, all the things. So that money is really the best for WCB's purposes, because it means when a good project comes along, we can fund it. And the bonds have gotten away from that little specific pots of money. That said, there is a person in the restoration team that focuses on oak woodland projects and can be your resource for restoration. On the acquisition side, we just all work on all the things for acquisition. So restoration, you'll get a specialist. Acquisition, you'll get a real estate specialist, regardless kind of the ecosystem type. I hope that's helpful. Question, will pre-applications submitted in calendar year 2025, will those need to be resubmitted? This is a little messy. So if it's a restoration project, I would say you should have heard from us by now, or you will hear from us. And if it's an acquisition project that you submitted before the door closed, you probably have heard from us by now that your project is moving forward or you need to reapply. So you might want to send a note depending on which side of the house you applied to and just check.
Yeah, I would say for the restoration, I think we've said we would, if you submitted something, we've said we would reply within 45 days, I think, and Scott or Shannon can correct me if that date's wrong. But so if you haven't, and it's been outside that window, you should just ping us again and we'll take a look where that is.
Yeah. So question, can this funding be used for conservation practices on farms? And I would say, generally speaking, row crop agricultural projects are better suited for Department of Conservation funding. They have a lot of good funding to support farmland and ag conservation. We do work in rangelands and grasslands, oak woodlands, where there is cattle grazing, but generally not row crops.
Yeah. So I would add that if there's hedgerows or pollinator habitat or something that you can do around the edges, that could potentially be something we'd be interested in.
Yeah. And we have done some amount of rice field flooding projects, but it's generally Department of Conservation is a better source.
I have one I can go.
Go ahead, jump.
Yeah, in general, folks are asking about kind of the differences in some of the pots or when an RFP is going to come out. And you guys don't really need to worry. I mean, there's a continuous application process. So we're not sending out an RFP for a specific part of Prop 4. All of it is under the ongoing application process. And you also don't need to worry about whether you fit into, enhancing fish resources or stream flow or something else. Because again, we are just looking for really strong restoration, acquisition, public access proposals, and we will then work with you and figure out kind of the best source of money for that activity.
I think that's really important to know. And that's a change in the last 4 or 5 years, but it's just an open application. You just tell us your project and then we will figure it out. There's a question here about, can fuel removal and or home hardening work here. And generally, no, that is not the kind of project WCB funds, but there are a fair amount of grants, I believe, at CAL FIRE that do that sort of work. We're more focused on wildlife habitat and biodiversity protection. Although obviously those are connected. Home hardening and fuel reduction is mostly a CAL FIRE thing.
There's one here about funding for California state recognized tribes as long as they're 501c3 status.
Yeah, so we work with tribes a lot, but there needs to be a 501c3 and or they connect sometimes with other nonprofit land trusts. God, there's so many questions coming in. A lot of people asking about the funding range and the average grant amount. And I guess I would encourage you to take a look at our existing, so on our website, wcb.ca.gov, really simple. You can look at past agendas for previous board meetings. You can look at the last 4 and you can get a sense of the range of projects that we fund. It can be really helpful. Each project is just a 2 or 3 page summary that explains sort of what we funded and what that looks like. And they really do range from a couple $100,000 all the way up to rarely, don't get excited, you know, $20-30 million. But traditionally, I'd say they're less than $5 million and more than 500,000 on average.
Here's one. If we submit a pre-application, can we reach out to staff shortly after that to discuss our application in real time rather than waiting 45 days or for a formal response? And yes, feel free to reach out anytime, both on the restoration side and acquisition side.
If we have distinct projects that are within the same watershed, should we submit separate pre-applications or one pre-application? I assume this is a restoration project.
Yeah, so I can answer that. I mean, we you can do all of the different activities within a watershed in one pre-application. I think it's best to give us kind of the full range of what you're looking to do. But that doesn't mean that we would then subsequently say, well, we're interested in this piece or that piece, or do 2 separate full applications, right? So you just need to get the pre-app in and kind of the range of things you'd like to do, and then we will work with you and determine whether or not that should stay as one application or be split into 2 applications. That's the type of consultation that we provide.
So there's a question here that says, if this is annual funding through the budget process, but a rolling application, will there be internal deadlines for each budget cycle? What's the cutoff? So no, we may spend all this money this year, but probably it will take us a year or 2 to get through the money that came through this budget cycle. If there's a request for additional funds, that would be next year through the next budget cycle. So we continue to spend the funds as we have them. So there's no cutoff. And as I said, we're continuously evaluating the projects. So anytime you have a good idea is the time to send it to us. Somebody's asking about the website requirements for DGS appraisal review. John, is that, I think that's available on our website?
Yes, let me look here.
You can put that in, we'll put that in the chat. Oh, wait. Can the application timeline slide be shown again? There is no application timeline. There is a continuous rolling open application starting tomorrow. You can submit your pre-application at any time. So please go ahead and let us know about your projects. How long does it take? Okay, John, go ahead. You can type it in the thing.
Specifications are under the grant documents and templates page.
Okay. So for the person who is looking for DGS appraisal review, they're in on our grants page under documents and templates. Let's see what else. Do you see any more, Rebecca?
Yeah, there's one question about the San Andreas Corridor program, since that's not actually in this current year's budget. So we don't know if that will become available. It's not proposed for this budget, and we're waiting for some additional direction from the legislature. So we will potentially see that in out years, but we don't know the time frame for that.
Yeah.
Somebody was looking for the pre-application. It's under the grants tab.
Yeah, so check out our grants page and wander around the different tabs, and you'll get full guidelines that'll describe a whole lot of what we just said out loud, and a lot of the nitty gritty is available on that site as well. How early should a full application be submitted if we want the board to decide by one of the dates listed? Is it a month before the board meeting early enough? That is nowhere near early enough. So if you want to be considered for a project, you should be planning 9 months to a year out. It takes that long for us to get the agreement in place. And if it's, as we've said, involves an acquisition, that's going to take even longer, because when we help purchase land or purchase conservation easement with state funds, we have to go through Department of General Services review to make sure that we're paying fair market value. So that is something you should plan for. Plenty of time. Says other agencies with Prop 4 funding put emphasis on projects in disadvantaged communities. Is this a stipulation of WCB as well? Absolutely. So 40% of Proposition 4, and I should have put this on a slide, it's already so ingrained in my head, is going to be targeted towards disadvantaged communities or severely disadvantaged communities. WCB already has this commitment. Its board has committed to justice communities. That's what Rebecca was referencing. So we are looking for projects, and we'll prioritize those that help provide a direct benefit. And that can be public access in a disadvantaged community. It can be programs that really target groups that may be taking youth out to a nature area. It can be providing clean air and water, cooling area, can be providing jobs. We're looking for projects that emphasize working with the California Conservation Corps. And incorporating traditional ecological knowledge or working with tribes in general. So all of those things, yes, we are interested in, and at least 40% of our funding is going to go there. Last year, 60% of our funds and projects went towards justice communities. So we're really committed to that at WCB, and you'll see that in our strategic plan.
So I see there's just a question about our existing guidelines, and our guidelines have been updated to include Prop 4. So those are also available on our website and already include Prop 4 for moving forward.
Because they don't see the pre-application template on the website. So maybe somebody who's helping in the back end can put that in again, but that should be on our grants page. What's the maximum term for a restoration grant, Rebecca?
Yeah, that is a good question, because once we get funding in a specific budget year, we generally have 3 years to get that into a grant, and then a couple additional years to actually finish the work. So the max that a restoration grant could be, if we got it happening really, really quickly, would be 5 years, but generally our restoration grants are 3 to 4 years in length.
So there's a question that Carol's trying to get in here on what's the total acres, which is being asked in the pre-application. How do you estimate that for a wildlife crossing project? And I think I would say just don't worry about it too much.
No.
Just, just describe your project. If you don't have a precise number of acres, that's okay. So just describe your project, give us the best description you can. If we ask you for a full application, we will work with you to make sure we get all the information that we need to put that grant through. So it's more important to just really describe your project and be able to answer as many questions as you can. Can Prop 4 funding be applied to research on federal state protected species that occur on land already purchased and under restoration by WCB? We generally don't fund research. Can farm acquisition with water rights included and the ability to transfer tribal water quality standards enforcements be fundable? I would say we do fund land acquisition that comes with water rights. It's complicated, it's challenging, but we've certainly done it. John, do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think that case, it'd be best to reach out to us directly and we can talk through your project to see whether it's worthwhile to put in a pre-application.
There are a lot of questions coming through about bundling projects through one organization that has multiple projects. And I would say on the whole, you know, describe what you're trying to do, but there's a good likelihood that we're going to want to break it up into individual projects if for no other reason than for CEQA. But I would say just describe, as Rebecca said, what you're interested in doing, and we'll take a look. What's the best tool to identify disadvantaged communities? Great question. So there's the DWR mapping tool, and this is actually linked in our strategic plan. So if you look at our strategic plan, there's a link to that there. I don't know if we have a link on our website, but the Department of Water Resources has their has a mapper who can help me remember what the name of it is. I'm dying here. John, do you remember? Shannon or Scott? who are on the phone?
EnviroScreen, or are you talking?
That's it. No, not EnviroScreen, the DWR.
Oh, it's just called a DWR mapper, I think.
Okay.
The
But if you-
DWR
if you-
mapping tool.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott. DWR mapping tool. So check that out.
Is how much of a acquisition cost will WCB cover? Will federal funding be needed? WCB for acquisition, we can cover 100% of purchase price, but you'll be more competitive if there is cost share, and it does not necessarily need to be federal funding.
Someone's asking who's the WCB Tribal Community Projects contact. So we do have a tribal liaison. Her name is Kendall Webster, and you can reach out to her. But if you are a tribe or you're working with a tribe and you're interested in a restoration project or you're interested in an acquisition project, you can also go to Rebecca or John or me, and we will help you.
Hey, Jennifer, I also wanted to note that the disadvantaged community mapping tools are also linked in our pre-application.
Oh, thank you so much, Shannon. That's why it helps. It's hard to read questions and answer them at the same time.
And Don Crocker's the restoration side, the tribal liaison.
I'm sorry, what?
Don Crocker.
Oh, I
for-
forgot. Sorry, Don Crocker too. Don Crocker on the restoration side. Thank you, John. So we've got Kendall Webster and Don Crocker, both are good tribal contacts, but again, we would help that too. Can you fund restoration of a project that's going to earn offsets to sell on the voluntary carbon market? Rebecca, can you answer that?
That's a hard question, but no, yeah. No.
And so the answer is generally no. We'll talk to you about it, but I think in part it's that, you know, if you're selling credits, we can't invest public dollars for a private good. And so that's where it gets tricky. Or if there is already a carbon project on the land, it's sort of a double support for from state funds. So, but we are willing to talk about it because sometimes there's ways to work that through.
I see one that's asking about just funding staff and education and outreach. And so, you know, a lot of people come to us and are asking just for capacity grants. We don't do just straight capacity grants, but if you have a project that's happening, a restoration project that's happening, you can allow for staff time and education and outreach within that specific project. So that means there could be support for staff to implement that restoration project and do some education and outreach associated with that project. But we don't do kind of standalone, just capacity building.
A lot of the questions I still see are very specific, and I would really encourage you to reach out to us and ask your specific questions so we can understand what you're requesting. Someone says, where can we track which projects are awarded? And those are all available on our website. Each board meeting, we post a full agenda that shows all the projects that are listed, that are getting awarded at that board meeting. And you can see them there.
There's one, would the nonprofit need to be registered in California or could it be registered in another state, but the work is done in California? We just require that you be a 501c3.
Yeah, and all work does need to be done in California, so we can't go outside of California's borders.
I'm not seeing any more that I think are, oh, hold on, I take that back. There's 57 questions. I gotta go all the way back to the top of the list. See what else we're missing.
There's one, I mentioned how long it typically takes DGS to review an appraisal. It is typically, we say 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes longer, sometimes short, but that's the average.
Yeah, a lot of these are really very specific questions that I think are better answered when you call us up. So, and a lot of them I think we've answered, and I apologize if we haven't gotten to all of them, but we're out of time. We really appreciate the attendance at this webinar. We love the excitement. Bring us your great projects. We want to work with you. We want to make great things happen in California. And as I said, we will share this recording and post it on our website. We'll also take a look at the Q&A once we're done. And if there's anything that is general, we'll add it to our FAQs that are on our website. But again, if it's specific to your project, just give us a call and we will help you work through your questions. So thank you again for your time. Have a great day, everyone.